If you want your home cinema to feel like a real cinema, you need to hear Mag-Theatron. With more than 20 years' experience in commercial theatres worldwide, Mag's award-winning speaker systems deliver the same cinematic impact, now purpose-built for residential use. Made in Ukraine and engineered in-house, up to 95% of every transducer is Mag's own design. From high SPL loudspeakers to infrasonic subwoofers and DSP-loaded amps, Mag-Theatron is the real deal. Exclusively available in Australia through Integrate Unlimited. If you've ever wished for a design partner without the overhead, meet Colosseum. Launched in 2024, Colosseum is a white-label design and engineering service built specifically for integrators, whether you're new to the game or running million-dollar installs. They turn basic floor plans into detailed, high-impact cinema-ready documentation, brand agnostic, collaboration first, and led by industry veteran Paul McLean. I've seen the work myself. This is world-class support for serious cinema projects. Colosseum, your behind-the-scenes design team. Welcome to the Master Integrator podcast, the show that explores what happens when design, technology, and people come together in the modern home. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. Before we begin, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Integrate Unlimited, the exclusive Australian distributor of Mag-Theatron, and Colosseum for making this episode possible. Today's guest is Andy Moore from Theban, a seasoned lighting expert who has worked in nearly every sector of the industry, from shopping centres to museums, and residential to galleries. Now immersed in lighting control and human-centric lighting, Andy brings both a technical and philosophical view to how we light our homes and why it matters. We talk about the rise of bus-controlled systems, the often misunderstood world of human-centric lighting, and what integrators should consider as they help shape healthier environments through technology. Whether you're an integrator, a builder, or someone thinking about your next renovation, there's a lot here to light your way. This is Master Integrator. Here's Andy Moore. Let's start with saying who you are, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, well, ended up in the lighting industry a little bit by accident, but always had an interest in science and technology. So when I did land there, it was fun and interesting. Kept my attention, certainly. It's a fast-moving industry, the lighting industry. It likes to reinvent itself pretty regularly. So the technology at one level doesn't change too much, but it's always got an update here and there. So it was fun to, really dive into the weeds of from my side, the physics of light, the spectrum, the intensity, issues like glare and design. So 25 years in the lighting industry now. But I do make it clear I'm not a designer. I am a system designer, but not a lighting designer. I've never felt particularly comfortable making recommendations about how things are going to look in the interior space. But of course, there's a lot of technical issues to deal with. If it's a televised sporting event, you need very precise lux levels very broadly across the working plane. So those kind of things were fun to learn and good to apply. I've worked in pretty much every sector of the industry, whether it's shopping centres, commercial, residential, galleries and museums have always been great fun. So that's the thing I love about the lighting industry, if you do have an interest in getting into it, is that there's just a space for everyone. I mean, it's such a broad category. I spent a fair bit of time with spectrometry, and working with a company out of Taiwan that sort of was in the early phases of sort of the human-centric lighting development, when people realized that photopic lux wasn't perhaps the best metric to focus on, and that we needed to be more aware of the kind of spectrum that was good for our health. So that was interesting. But then about 3 years ago, I joined a German manufacturer called Theban, who have been building lighting control products since 1921. And that was great because I hadn't spent any time in that industry. And so it was like starting all over again. When I first joined, it was all learning about dichroic lamps, MR16s, compact fluorescence, linear fluorescent, metal halide, high pressure sodium, street lighting. And then the LED revolution came in, and wow, that was really fast and adapted much more quickly than I think anyone anticipated. But I'd never touched controls. So I ended up with Theban, not by accident, but because, yeah, it was time to learn something new. And yeah, that's where I got to meet you. And it's been great fun to learn all about the integration industry.
So you've obviously got a very broad, history there when you're talking about shopping centres and a lot of commercial jobs and obviously residential. Have you found that the underlying principles across all of those categories are the same, or have you actually had to learn different things for each of those categories?
I think the principles are fairly broad, actually. Yeah, I mean, once you learn about photopic lux and sort of applying standards, Australian standards to design work, system design work, those principles are fairly broadly applied. But when you look into the weeds, the details, oh my goodness, there's so much to learn. I mean, to become a specialist lighting designer in a particular field, like sports stadiums or like aged care residences, then to really get to know the building and construction codes well, oh, that's a lot of work. So, yeah, I've touched a lot of those industries, but probably only become competent in a couple of them.
And so you say there's so much to learn. So how did you actually get access to the content that you need in order to learn what you have so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, there are short courses. RMIT does a good lighting course over 2 years that enables you to join the IES, the Illuminating Engineers Society, at a particular level. But not everyone in the industry needs to do that. There are shorter courses. There's a guy called David Bird who works out of Collingwood who runs like a 6-week program. And that generally gives you enough information to get started. And to be honest, most of the people I've worked with over the time have just had a very curious mind and learned how to apply the principles themselves. A bit like Australian standards, it's highly regulated, but not highly enforced in the sense there is no genuine requirement for a lighting designer to be certified to a particular level to do residential design or some aspects of commercial design. It's only when you really need to specialize and be able to sign off on documentation that you need to have a particular qualification. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the best option is these days, but I mean, if you join a lighting company, there's plenty of work in the industry. You'll probably get enough training in-house in the first few months. And then if you do decide that you like it and want to make a full career of it, yeah, I mean, going straight to that 2-year RMIT course, or I'm sure the same thing applies interstate. I'm not particularly familiar with the other states' arrangements, but yeah, it's definitely worthwhile.
So over the course of your history then, so what has your experiences been with the residential integrators? How have you worked with them? What role do you see them playing in the future of lighting design and lighting control?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I hadn't really heard of system integration until the last probably 5 years. I'd always worked with contractors, electrical contractors, and knew that sector very well. And of course, prior to LED, lighting as a sort of industry sector was a fast-moving consumer good. I mean, there was a lot of maintenance requirements. Lamps and gear wouldn't last all that long, so that was a primary need. As we've switched over to LED so rapidly and the light sources do last a lot longer, that element has started to wane a little bit. It's still there. You still need strong service agreements and good maintenance arrangements to maintain things. But in terms of system integration, this was a really fascinating thing for me to learn about. And appreciate that yes, there is a control layer over the top of the electrical cabling we use for general power requirements. And in specific, the case of lighting control, it just makes a world of difference to have a bus control system. Another element of my background was a bit of audio engineering, and that was where I first understood the concept of bus control. And once again, not something I've had formal training in. But for audio engineering, the concept is exactly the same. You need your power and you need a control cable to be able to get things to work together really harmoniously. So once again, another interesting sort of standard I believe should apply is that really all future homes should have bus control for their power. It makes future changes just so much easier, that it's going to pay for itself in no time. If you're ever going to have work done to change switching arrangements or lighting configurations, if you haven't got a bus communication system in your home, then it's something you should consider the next time you build or renovate. So specifically to integrators, that's what impressed me most, is that talking to them and understanding why this actually made sense finally clicked with me, and I understood the real benefit. So the role system integrators play in lighting from here primarily is, like you were saying about CEDIA, an education role. At the moment, electricians don't deal with bus systems specifically. They probably do, but it's not something that is really part of their remit to get into a project and get installed. They're very much concerned with the power supply and the typical arrangement for a home, which is light switches on walls. And then once that's installed, it's pretty much set and forget. If you come home and decide you do want to change that run of 3 downlights above the kitchen bench to be individually controlled, that's going to take a lot of electrical work and be quite an expensive job. If you've got that bus control cable installed from the start, it's just a simple matter of programming. And that's what I was never really familiar with until I met and started working with integrators, is that having that capability to take a program, literally a software program, type in some arrangements, whether it's a new connection or a time delay or some kind of sensing, or just changing the way things are switched. This is a huge improvement to how we can arrange our residential lighting systems. And yeah, I'd really like to see that become the standard for residential homes in Australia.
Now that you've done a bit of work with integrators in the market, are there other, misunderstandings that they have, or anything that you kind of sit there and think, I just wish they knew this because it would make my life easier, or make the a lighting designer's life easier, or even potentially make their own life easier?
Yeah, look, not being an integrator, it's hard for me to know. The one thing I would say is that it's extremely underutilized, the concept of time control. As soon as you have a bus control system, you have that option, or you should have that option. And this is where the future of lighting should be, is that it should always be time controlled, not just for our own well-being, but also for dark sky issues, nighttime appreciation. It's amazing, going back to my early days in the lighting industry, when you're young and enthusiastic and all you want to do is see more and more lights being used, and it's great, it's a commercial arrangement, it's a big shopping center, they want things to be bright and beautiful. You sort of come away with this impression that everything just needs to be bright, 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 bright. That's why people are buying lights. That's why people are installing lights. They want bang for buck. They want something that they switch on the light and all of a sudden it feels like the moon landing or something. You've got heaps of light over your desk and you feel great. Well, that's fine, but it's not good, especially for exterior lighting. And certainly now with a lot of evidence coming through about this topic of human-centric lighting, which I hope we can talk about, all light should be dimmable. And you can see this yourself, just walk along any street. As it's becoming dusk and exterior lights start to come on, they don't look too bright initially. But if you go back at 2 a.m. or even 10 p.m. once it is dark, and you try and walk past that same light, it looks incredibly bright. And so it's such a subjective feeling. It's not precise, but if it's dimmable, you will get the same feeling of brightness at 20 lux at nighttime as you would with 2,000 lux during the daytime. So that's the missing element to me. That's what system integrators need to understand, is that residents and homeowners don't really understand, the difference that a dimming function will make to their lives. When we had incandescent globes, of course, restaurants and hospitality sectors knew that turning down that dimming and making it really warm and ambient was lovely, and it created a great atmosphere. So that has always been around, and everyone recognizes that feeling and that concept. But that concept itself can be applied to every section of the day, and should be. And previously, when system integration was confined to that high-end luxury market, of course, no one needed to spend $20,000 just to be able to get that functionality. But of course, it doesn't cost anything like that nowadays to buy dimmable LED lights and get someone to come and program it for you with some good time control.
Connected Magazine is your go-to publication for the commercial and residential AV and smart home industry. Every edition features 3 hands-on product reviews from experienced integrators. In this edition, we take a look at high-power commercial speakers from Redback, the Sonos Era 100 Pro, its first channel-only solution, and the ViewSonic V57 4K projector, an ideal pick for home theatres. Find these reviews and more in the latest edition of Connected Magazine, plus all the latest AV news and product releases online. Links in this episode's description. So you mentioned human-centric lighting there, and I know it's a term that you're not a big fan of, but for integrators who might have heard of the concept, or let's say there's some listening who haven't heard of the concept of human-centric lighting, what is it? How would you define what it actually is and the role that it plays on, well, humans and biorhythms?
Yeah, it's really interesting because at exactly the same time the industry was being forced to make their light sources as efficient as possible, and essentially many new entrants came onto the market with government rebates, the rollout of compact fluorescent lamps to all the homes, and then the switch to LED. This was all being driven by one priority, and that was to save money on energy costs. So at exactly the same time that process started, just coincided with a new discovery, a physiological discovery, and scientists found that there was a different type of ganglion cell in the eye that was particularly photosensitive and didn't provide a visual function. It provided a circadian function, a regulation function to the human body. This is an ancient system. In fact, it existed before sight in evolutionary terms. So it's ancient and it's regulatory. So this particular process physiologically governs many of our human features, whether it's a physiology in terms of liver function or heart rate or just mental well-being and health in general. But most importantly, sleep. And when you think about sleep as a health intervention, you know yourself, if you get a good night's sleep, you feel a lot better the next day. So there's 2 elements. There's the circadian clock that regulates many components within the body and applies to all ecological, physiological systems. But then there's also the improvement of sleep. And so the primary discoveries were around how important it was to have different light levels at different times of the day to get your body prepared for sleep. And it turned out after 20 years of research, of studies and evidence produced, that it's really critical. You should not be doing what we're doing currently if you want to get a good night's sleep. That's not to say people still sometimes don't sleep well, but we all know people who are quite photosensitive, and at some, everyone's on that scale somewhere. And so the strongest evidence is to show that if you improve your sleep, you will have a much better long-term health outcome. It's incredible. I mean, some people say like having less than 8 hours sleep is like the new smoking. Getting less than 6 hours, it equates to a similar sort of long-term health outcome as, being a regular smoker. So that demonstrates the type of impact we're talking about. It's not insignificant. It's incredibly significant. But there are many, many deeper rabbit holes you can go down to once you start looking into the type of studies that have been conducted and the types of specific health conditions that lighting is connected to. And this can be as strong as cardiovascular issues. For example, I like to remind people of, the benefits of daylight saving, because we all enjoy it when it switches back to summertime and we get that extra hour in the evening. But what some people don't realize is that very same week after daylight saving changes, heart attacks and strokes go up by about 10% because people's circadian rhythms are disrupted. So once again, it's anecdotal, but it does demonstrate that what we're talking about is a significant health effect. And so taking a little bit of care to not prioritize energy efficiency first, but prioritize your own health first, is probably a good idea. And I think where the industry is at now.
So what's the role of the integrator here as far as human-centric lighting is concerned? Is there a programming requirement that they'll need to be across, or is it really incumbent on the manufacturers and suppliers out there to be developing products that they can simply pick up and integrate into larger controls?
Yeah, I think that's where the industry is now. It hasn't been accessible and available primarily because, academic institutions and research laboratories are conservative by their nature, so very specifically when it comes to health. And when I first learnt about the impacts lighting could have on human health and well-being, it really does take quite some time to adjust the way you think about it, because it just doesn't sort of make sense initially to think that something as innocuous as turning on a light could have a similar impact to the diet that you eat or the exercise regime that you integrate into your life. So we're only now just getting to the point where enough long-term research studies have been developed and published that what's called melanopic equivalent daylight intensity has now been released as an advisable new standard. So I think from an integrator's point of view, they can feel quite fortunate that they're coming in at a time where it's starting to get practical. Up until now, I don't think there have been many opportunities for them to take the lead and say, hey, you should do this or you should do that, because it's getting into murky territory. I've listened to a few episodes of your podcast and I really appreciate the attention you give to the integrator's role from a compliance perspective and making sure that they're safe, that they're insured, that they're doing a good job that keeps their business healthy. I imagine it won't be too long before you can buy off-the-shelf products that are, quite easy to integrate and do deliver a particular algorithm or a set of parameters that work out of the box and tick all the human-centric lighting categories. I mean, we have had a product out like that for about 3 years now. It just has a drop-down menu where you can choose the type of interior environment, and then it will regulate the light level and the color temperature via DALI, the digital interface. And so that's pretty simple for an integrator to install and choose, and not have to take too many of those important decisions on their own without having some backup from a manufacturer to say, yeah, I was just doing what was advised, in the instructions and in the box. Right now, I think people should be careful about how they apply it. But at the same time, if you do take it quite broadly, you really don't need to be concerned too much if all you're saying is, I just want to give homeowners and residents the ability to choose their own dimming level at their own time of the day. So once you've installed your lights in your home at 100%, well, you can't go any higher than that. So that's your maximum. And then, of course, one thing the industry is still struggling with is dimming quality. And so when you dim it down to 1%, I'm sure all integrators have come across some unsmooth dimming, which is no fun. And so you may end up, deciding that 10% is the lowest dimming level you want to be comfortable to go to. And so then you've set your minimum. And then from there, you can just engage with your client and say, you wanted 100% between what time of the day? Between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m.? Perfect. All right. Well, after 5 p.m., we switch to 50%. And then after 11 p.m., we switch to 10%. It can be as simple as that. And you don't even need to worry about color temperature change initially. If you do want to have a tunable white luminaire, Well, that's a lovely feature too. And certainly there's a lot of evidence that blue light in the morning is very good for you and boosts productivity and concentration and focus. But it's equally important to have a very low level of light and very redshifted towards the evening. And certainly what I mentioned before, the melanopic EDI, which is a new standard instead of photopic lux, which most people just think of as the regular type of lighting measurement. Melanopic EDI just accounts for the blue light content. And the standards are published now. So this has been ratified by the CIE internationally, embraced by the IES here in Australia and the International Association of Lighting Designers as well. They've all published their own working papers on this and agreed it's a good place to start. And so those maximums and minimums are 250 as sort of like a daylight standard minimum interior level, 250 M EDI, 10 lux or 10 M EDI in the 3 hours prior to whatever your bedtime is. So that's fairly easy to program. And then in the bedroom environment where you're going to be sleeping, maximum of 1. And so that's where the industry has really shifted. In the last 20 years, I never once had to consider the minimum lighting level on a design. It was always about achieving 400 lux at the desk or 320 or 160 or 80. It was really only in street lighting that levels as low as 1 to 5 lux was ever really being considered. So it was never inside the home. And to be honest, Australian standards aren't really designed at all for residential applications. That's where I'd start as an integrator, would be become familiar with the concept itself, read a couple of interesting papers or listen to a couple of good podcasts. And it's actually fairly simple. It's just adding the element of time control to your lighting level so that you can have maximum and minimum schedules. And once you've done that, you're most of the way there. After that, if you do want to add some color changing elements, well, that's lovely. And certainly I think that's where most manufacturers will be looking to develop that sort of off-the-shelf technology that can be applied very easily. But like you were saying before, that's really the role of the lighting designer and probably shouldn't be up to the system integrator to make those decisions unless their client is very much already in tune. And many are. I mean, lighting is such a big industry and people do have a genuine interest in lighting. So many people are already pretty well versed in this themselves.
So you mentioned there that there's a few systems on the market already that integrators should be able to pick up. There's also a lot that aren't optimized for human-centric lighting. Is there room today, or will there be room in the future for those traditional or legacy lighting control systems that don't embrace human-centric lighting?
Well, I'm not sure I agree that some don't. I mean, if you dim up and down and you have an element of time control, then like I said, you're about 80% of the way there. There's a guy at Harvard who was instrumental in the early days of the discovery of the impact of light on this separate system outside our visual center. Stephen Lockley, his name is, and he proposes that really, at a basic level, a human-centric lighting system is as simple as having a ceiling light and a desk lamp. The ceiling light you use during the day and you read the paper and you do whatever work you need to do under that. And then at nighttime, you turn the overhead light off and you turn the desk lamp on with a nice warm color and a low level. That's enough to get started. So that can explain how simple it is to make a significant improvement to your lighting system without any complex control system. So as soon as we start talking about any form of digital control, 100% you're going to have the capability of doing a lighting system that is much closer to what's good for you, as opposed to just having the same bright intensity all the time. So yeah, it really just comes down to marketing. I mean, I know the lighting industry loves to reinvent itself, and it's always been fascinated with the idea of bringing the sunlight indoors. That focus has never really changed. It's just that the technology has, and we're now a lot better at it with digital technology in the form of semiconductors, LEDs. So that will continue. And of course, there'll be the marketing spin that says this is the best and closest thing to sunlight you can buy. And to be fair, there is still a long way to go in the research. One example, going back to where I started in terms of energy efficiency as the wrong priority to be focusing on when it comes to lighting, is precisely because you can generate a perfect white light with just red, green, and blue. And so if you design a LED light source for maximum efficiency, then all you're really doing is creating enormous peaks of intensity at very narrow bands of the spectrum. So you're removing a lot of the spectrum in order to generate that efficiency. And once again, one of the ironies of moving away from incandescent is that incandescent was incredibly broad spectrum. It generated a lot of wasted heat in the form of the infrared band of the spectrum. Well, it turns out anyone that's looked into what's called light therapy or red light therapy will immediately recognize that red end of the spectrum has all sorts of benefits for our eyes, for our skin. And once again, I'm not saying an integrator should be making health recommendations, to clients on the basis of sort of my suggestions here. But it doesn't take long to see that if all we do is focus on efficiency, we're missing out on, what we do get when we go outside. And this is the core of the problem, in the sense that if all of us just spent, a couple of hours outdoors every day and then came into quite a dim environment in our homes at nighttime, we probably wouldn't need too much intervention to get the benefits of what's called human-centric lighting at the moment. But we don't. Most of us spend about 90% of our time indoors, some even more than that. And so that's where the problem comes from. If you're in the internal space under artificial lighting most of the time, your body clock will suffer, your physiology will suffer, and the long-term health consequences will not be as good as they could have been. So it's interesting to see, not so much from a control perspective, because to my mind, you can only turn lights on and off, you can only dim them up and down, and you can add the element of time control. There's not much more you can do outside of creating scenes, and of course the AV and theatre stage stuff is a different kettle of fish altogether. But given that the control system is really just doing those three simple tasks, there's not much more that needs to be done. And really, it's going to be the lighting manufacturers themselves that need to sort of start introducing broader spectrum lights. But once again, it'll be a long time before the science and the sort of the standards are settled on what the best choices are.
Going back to that example that you gave at the start of that answer there about, at a very basic level, human-centric lighting could be a desk lamp and a ceiling light. Is there a risk then that these systems could be over-engineered or over-designed? And if so, how could that potentially be avoided?
Well, that's a great question. Look, I don't think we need to be talking about human-centric lighting to sort of tackle that issue. Of course, things are overcomplicated and unnecessary in many cases. But no, the fundamentals remain the same. Having a bus control system for your electrical network in the home is the basis of a smart home. If you haven't got one of those, you haven't really got a smart home. If you're just buying products over the counter that work off a little Wi-Fi thing and sort of mildly integrate and make your life a little bit more convenient, well, great. But it's not a long-term solution. Those products are going to, be outdated, unsupported pretty quickly, and end up as electronic waste. And once again, a thing I'm not particularly happy with the lighting industry about is the amount of electrical waste it produces. Not as much of that is recycled as it could be, and some of it just simply can't be recycled. So I really think it's incumbent upon us to promote long-term solutions. And so a bus system inside the home is, to me, the basis. And once you have that, then you have not only the basis for a good lighting control system, but everything else that goes along with a smart home. And yes, of course, once you get to that level, you do run the risk of things becoming overly complicated. I'll give you an example from my early days with integrating sensors, motion control sensors, and switching lights on and off with those. So, of course, when energy efficiency is being considered, you want to maximize the amount of daylight penetration into the room, try and use the natural light that's coming in first and foremost. And so what happened, what started about, I think, 20 years ago by my memory, was these devices came onto the market that had an integrated lux sensor in the ceiling, and theoretically, the light levels could dim up and down to balance the natural light with the artificial light to deliver an even lux level at the working surface. But unfortunately, that was overly complicated then, and often the maintenance people who came to resolve any issues that popped up as complaints from staff or residents, it was hard to rectify. It was a complex system, and if you didn't understand what the goal was, and if you didn't understand how to solve the problem, often the easiest thing, unfortunately, is to rip it out and just go back to a standard model where at least people flick a switch, they get the light, happy days. So that's an example where, unfortunately, the complexity has led to a modern problem of people being reluctant to embrace this type of technology, even though it makes perfect sense. And now that we've had this technology for 30 years, you should be doing it. It's not only good for the environment and good for you to have that natural light coming in as much as possible. The balancing, the digital control, the algorithms, the components and the technology the manufacturers use these days are well and truly dealing with that perfectly. So it's something that unfortunately I don't see a lot of in the industry. It is underutilized. I primarily work with a bus control system called KNX, designed in Europe and designed to facilitate long-term solutions and make those products last for as long as a house would, and make sure that system is upgradable, maintainable over the full life of the home. So that's what I want to see, solutions that last for a long time and avoid that problem of having people come to maintain your system, not be able to work it out, and therefore bypass it, or even worse, throw it in the bin.
So obviously, lighting is a huge subject, and it will be very hard for someone to be an expert across everything. But obviously, there are things that integrators do need to know, need to understand. A resource that obviously I'm familiar with is because I've just been interviewed by you for your podcast. You are another, like me, middle-aged white guy with a podcast. Trailblazers us.
But 10 years too late, you reckon?
I like to see myself as a trendsetter. So tell us a little bit about Circadia, the podcast, and some of the subjects that you cover off.
Thanks. Yeah, well, it's been a fun ride. I'm joined by my co-host, Rachel Thompson. She's a lighting designer out of Newcastle. And we got together because we'd both been fascinated by the subject. Her story was neonatal care and learning from Stephen Lockley himself at an IES committee meeting about the impact light can have on babies and the development. And a similar story for me. The story goes, Philips, now called Signify, were playing around with OLED when that was a relatively new technology, and they were trying to come up with some interesting devices. And they've got a big healthcare section. And they developed a really great product. I think this is around 2013 by my recollection. Anyone who's had a baby knows where you don't want to end up is in the ICU. It's scary, and it means the mother and baby are separated. And often that's to do with jaundice, a yellowing of the skin. It's a very common thing that needs to be dealt with. And the remedy for that is phototherapy. It is light therapy, literally bright light that will cure the jaundice. And so the ICU is the right place for them. But they developed a blanket that meant you could wrap the baby in an OLED sheet and deliver that same light so that it could stay with the mother. And I just thought that was the most fascinating and brilliant invention I'd ever heard of in the lighting industry. So that's what got me interested. And at around that same time, this concept of human-centric lighting was starting to get some traction. So, yeah, I've been studying it for well over 10 years now and watching it develop and watching the ebb and flow of ideas and applications and the way people think it can be applied. Initially, you think, wow, this is the best thing ever. And this is going to solve all our problems. World hunger, poverty, it's going to be over. Great. And then you realize, hang on, people are so subjective. People are so individual. It's going to be very hard to develop a broad-based system that just suits everyone. So once again, once an integrator can deliver a bus control system for a home, well, you're more than halfway there. So the Circadia podcast was developed to share the kind of information from the people themselves that actually did this research. So far we've had people like Professor Shantha Rajaratnam from Monash, one of the most renowned institutes in the world on this topic, right here in Melbourne. So he's got a great team of people, and I've known them for many, many years, and look forward to their continuing work in the sector. They put forward a couple of really bold proposals to try and get the ball rolling and some momentum in the field. So it was great to hear his story of how he ended up in that particular field of research. And believe it or not, he's actually in psychology. So once again, lighting is such a broad category that people from all academic disciplines can end up there. So the guys like that have got a lot to talk about. Stephen Lockley, one of the sort of the aged care specialists. We've got a new season starting soon, and this is where we get really into the practical applications, start talking to the people that are actually delivering it on the ground and the type of responses we get from the consumers and the residents of these places. So, yeah, check it out, Circadia.
That was Andy Moore, and I hope this conversation has helped you see lighting in a different light. It's not just about brightness or energy savings. It's about well-being, about control, about creating homes that truly support the people who live in them. If you're an integrator, this episode is your cue to get more comfortable with time control, dimming, and even the basics of human-centric lighting. And if you're looking for guidance or products that can help you get there, the right conversation can make all of the difference. If you found today's episode valuable, please share it with a colleague, a designer, or even a client. And if you want to talk more about how you can bring these ideas into your projects, please reach out. Thanks for listening to Master Integrator. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time.